Octavian Augustus, Tacitus, Marcus Aurelius. Augustus's reconstruction of the Roman world. The murder of Julius Caesar was in part a reaction to his growing leanings toward despotism, and although it led to a resumption of civil war, it was not wholly in vain. It demonstrated the tenacity with which republican traditions still held on at Rome, and so helped to determine the final settlement established by Augustus after his victory over Antony and Cleopatra at Actium in 31 BCE. That decisive battle, in fact, was pictured by the Romans as a victory of the old Roman way of life over the autocratic forces of Orientalism, represented by Antony's paramour, Cleopatra, with her polluted crew of creatures foul with lust. And accordingly, Augustus claimed that his system of government, known in history as the Principate or Princeps, the name for leader in Latin, Augustus's favorite title, was in essence a restoration of the Republic. Quote, "It may be my privilege to establish the Republic safe and sound on its foundations," Suetonius reports him as saying, "gathering the fruit of my desire to be known as the author of the best possible constitution, and taking with me to the grave the hope that the foundation that I have laid will be permanent." End quote. The nature of this best possible constitution has been the subject of much debate ever since. Were Augustus's words sincerely uttered, and was he really a true republican who reluctantly kept for himself only such power as would ensure the continued operation of the Constitution and prevent a return to anarchy? Or was he at heart a tyrant who carefully camouflaged his autocratic powers under republican reforms? And modern scholars are still debating the question in much of the same fashion as did the ancient Romans. And next, we will go talk about Tacitus. Tacitus was also a historian. The greatest Roman writer of history was Tacitus. His dates to around 120 CE, whose annals and histories cover the period of the early empire from the death of Augustus to that of Domitian in CE 96 in his own day, and roughly he covers the 1st century. He is outstanding for his ability to evaluate and criticize the facts that he carefully collected and verified, and his unique style is characterized by its biting irony and its clipped epigrammatic sentences filled with a world of meaning. And like Thucydides, as well as Livy, he sought after lessons that he believed history provided. To Tacitus, these were moral lessons, and he defined the object of history to be to ensure that merit shall not lack its record, and to hold before the vicious word and deed the terrors of posterity and infamy. And so he was talking mostly in his histories about ethics, one of the domains of philosophy. He idealized the freedom of the old republic and exaggerated the tyrannical behavior of the early imperators after Augustus. And the annals, for example, Tacitus reports two opposing estimates of Augustus, and although he claims to be impartial and does not choose between them, it is not difficult to ascertain his own conclusion, that Augustus had fatally undermined republican liberty. The Pax Romana and divergent views within. The Augustan reorganization of the Roman world lasted without major change through the death of Marcus Aurelius, which we will discuss later, in CE 180. And these 2 centuries of peace and security, the Pax Romana, constitute the longest period of tranquility known in the entire history of the Western world. And it is the judgment of many modern historians, as well as myself, that the ideals and practices of Roman imperial administration were generally successful, and that modern states can learn much from them. Particularly happy was Rome in her methods of Romanization and civilization of backward peoples in Western Europe. By her spirit of practical realism, wise compromise, generous grants of citizenship, and development of local, tribal, or municipal autonomy, it inspired a feeling of loyalty in the Western provinces. And this comes from Albert Trevor in History of Ancient Civilization in 2 volumes. And to many of Rome's high-spirited neighbors, the prospect of Roman domination was unattractive, to say the least, but the writings of Tacitus throw light on both sides of the matter. Concerning Tacitus and his histories or inquiries, by the prosperity and order of 800 years has this empire been consolidated. The year of 69 CE, known as the year of the 4 Imperators, witnessed a temporary breakdown of the Pax Romana after the death of Nero, when a series of civil wars were fought by rival frontier armies seeking to elevate their respective commanders to imperial power. Quote, the secret of empire was now disclosed, that an imperator could be made elsewhere than that at Rome. And that was a quote from Tacitus. And the resulting anarchy encouraged a revolt of subject peoples along the lower Rhine. And again, the Rhine is the river. And so the leader of the revolt was a German chieftain named Julius Civilis, who had served with his troops in the Roman auxiliary armies for 25 years, and then had been granted Roman citizenship. He and his people had been aroused by Nero's high-handed arrest of their officers on the charge of treason, and he now urged other German tribes in the area to join him in forming an independent German kingdom. And inspired by this German example, Belgian tribes in northeastern Gaul, led by the Treveri and the Ligones, the latter having recently received Roman citizenship, also revolted and proclaimed a national state. The revolts collapsed early in the year 70 AD or CE, when a strong Roman expedition arrived on the scene. Tacitus then reports in his histories the substance of the speech that was delivered to the Treveri and Ligones by the Roman commander Cerealis after their surrender. It sums up bluntly and realistically the Roman Empire's political policy of submission and safety as an alternative to petty kingdoms and intestine wars. Concerning Tacitus and his Agricola, they create a desert and call it peace. Shortly after the suppression of the Rhineland revolt, Cerealis was appointed governor of Britain by Vespasian, who had emerged victorious out of the year of the 4 Imperators. The conquest of Britain was only half completed. Claudius had begun it in the year 43, but under Nero, the Romans had been set back by a revolt under famed Queen Boudicca. Cerealis and his successors now resumed the northward march of Roman conquest, which was completed by Agricola, which was Vespasian's 3rd governor of Britain from CE 78 to 83, who conquered Caledonia, which is Scotland, and during Domitian's reign, Rome's legions were needed on the Rhine and the Danube River frontiers. Agricola was recalled and Caledonia abandoned. So Scotland was abandoned at that point. But Tacitus, who was Agricola's son-in-law, wrote a biography of him, which is at once a eulogy to a noble Roman, a description of Britain and its conquest, and a case study of Roman imperialism in action. The last point is illustrated by the following in his Agricola, and of course the speech which Tacitus attributes to the Caledonian chieftain Calgacus just before his final defeat by the Romans. A description of Roman imperialism as it appeared to freedom-loving people. It balances the Roman picture of the Pax Romana. And then we are going to talk about Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. He said, quote, my nature is rational and social, and my city and country, so far as I am Antoninus, is Rome, but so far as I am a man, it is the world. Marcus Aurelius. When Marcus Aurelius died in the year 180, at the end of the 2nd century CE, in Vienna on the Danube frontier, at that time it was called Vindobana, he had completed 13 successful years of campaigning against the first great wave of Germanic penetration into the empire, and as a Roman imperator, he had fought hard to maintain the security of the state, and as a Roman intellectual and philosopher, he had written on the values that sustained him in the face of a world beginning to grow turbulent and weary. And of course, he also united the entire empire under one chief goddess, and it was that of Serapis. And of course, these thoughts set down at odd moments late in life under the simple heading of to himself constitute the last great expression of the classical viewpoint. Centered in Stoicism, that human reason is an adequate guide to the good life, his basic view is that there is not to be found in human life anything better than justice, truth, temperance, fortitude, and, in a word, anything better than your own mind's satisfaction in the things which it enables you to do according to right reason. And yet in the writings of the latter Roman Stoics, such as Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, it is possible to detect an underlying pessimism about man's ability to save himself by his own means and resources. When we see Marcus Aurelius choosing to rely on what he terms providence rather than the atoms of the scientific Epicurean outlook, and rejecting the classical city of Athens for a spiritual city of God, we see pagan thought becoming more religious and moving toward the ultimate triumph of Christianity, which we see in the writings of Augustine and other writers of the medieval world. And that would conclude our reading on Tacitus, Aurelius, and Augustus.